Michael Torres has never been so happy to feel the gentle Florida sun on his face, which met him with motherly tenderness after several years of contract serving in the Marine Corps. Being now retired, he no longer had to face the screaming instructors and other hardships of Army life, which he had to endure at the Paris Island training camp. Sitting in the window seat of the bus, Michael looked at the passers-by, who were hurrying about their business and didn't even know that someone might be watching them. After several years spent in the military, it seemed to the man that civil life was heaven on earth. The gentle sun, the hot sand of the beaches, and the general atmosphere of the never-ending holiday turned his head. Michael had been missing outdoor activities and surfing so much. The bus finally arrived at Michael's stop and opened the doors for the man. Michael smiled to himself and hurried to the exit. The old bus doused the man with the cloud of exhaust gases and rushed away, leaving him standing alone at the bus stop. The man looked around and went towards his house, which was about half a mile away. People on the street smiled at the man dressed in the military uniform, and some even raised their fingers approvingly. When the house was only a few yards away, the man sped up noticeably. He was in a hurry to hug his mother, who had been working as a cleaning lady in high school for a long time. Michael deliberately didn't tell her the exact date of his arrival, intending to surprise the woman. Knocking on the door, the man was happy to hear the shuffling of his mother's steps in response, as well as her muffled murmur. "Michael? Son, is that really you? Why didn't you call me? I would have made your favorite turkey and orange sauce," Mrs. Torres exclaimed, opening the door. "Come on, Mom. You'll have more than enough time to feed me all you want. You better tell me how you've been. How's Daisy?" Michael asked with a smile. Rosemary Torres shuddered at her son's words. She got visibly tense and gave her son a rather strange look. "Everything's fine with me, son, just like always. But Daisy, she's at college, studying, and she seems to have gotten a job," Mrs. Torres answered, desperately trying to make her voice sound confident. However, despite his mother's best efforts, Michael felt the strange tremor in her voice. Therefore, after having a quick snack, the man decided to take a walk and visit his old friends. Dressed in civilian clothes, Michael kissed his mother on the cheek and hurried to leave the house. "Just don't stay out late, son," said Mrs. Torres. A wave of anxiety suddenly came over the woman, who was worried about her son. Meanwhile, Michael was already approaching the house of Simon Green, whom he'd been friends with since school. Having shared a quick hug, the friends sat down at the terrace and started sharing the latest news with each other over a glass of cold lemonade. Of course, Michael did most of the talking. He shared stories about serving in the Marine Corps and the intricacies of Army life. Finally, when Simon's interest began to wane, Michael asked, "Have you heard anything about Daisy? I stopped getting letters from her about 2 months before I was discharged. Is she all right?" Having heard his friend's question, Simon suddenly turned pale. He took a deep breath and replied, "Please don't overreact. Daisy, she's getting married today." Michael felt his cheeks turn crimson and his head start spinning. Grabbing his friend by the jacket, the man shouted, "What are you talking about? What wedding? We were engaged, weren't we?" But Simon only spread his hands guiltily and began his story. As it turned out, Daisy was getting married to Clive Anderson, who was the son of a successful businessman. Michael remembered him from high school when he was just a puny kid in glasses who loved flaunting his wealth. Unfortunately, despite Simon's best efforts to persuade his friend not to do it, Michael still decided to go to the rich man's house in order to find out everything once and for all. When the man was only approaching the luxurious mansion of Clive Anderson, he could already hear the loud music and cheerful laughter coming from inside. Since there were so many guests, none of them noticed the tall young man get onto the impromptu stage that stood in the yard and take the microphone. And only when Michael greeted the newlyweds, the guests quieted down a bit and looked warily towards the stage. When Daisy saw her ex-fiance, she turned pale and lowered her eyes guiltily. In the meantime, Michael plucked up the courage and in a voice trembling with tension, said, "Taking this opportunity, I wanted to wish a happy life with her new family to the woman I loved very much. All the best to you, Daisy." The man didn't get to finish his speech as his voice was drowned out by the excited rumbling of the many wedding guests. Out of the corner of his eye, Michael saw Daisy trying to make her way to the stage. She had tears frozen in her eyes. Gritting his teeth, the man got off the stage and, pushing his way through the crowd with his elbows, rushed for the exit. Michael was sure that he was leaving forever and would never see Daisy again. The man didn't look where he was going and didn't even notice when he stepped onto the road. Tears were flowing down Michael's face, and only the rapidly approaching twilight hid the pain that could be read on his face. Unfortunately, the man was immersed in his sad thoughts and didn't notice the rapidly approaching car until it was too late. Of course, the driver of the Chevrolet tried to stop the car, but it kept going for a couple more feet and hit Michael anyway. The man got literally bent in half on the impact and got thrown to the side of the road. Having lost consciousness, Michael never got to see the ambulance drive up to the scene of the accident or the terror on the face of the unfortunate driver. The man woke up in the hospital room. At the sight of the bright white walls, Michael closed his eyes and then slowly opened them again. Seeing several doctors around him, the man tried to say something, but all he could manage to let out was some incomprehensible moaning. "Don't rush, Mr. Torres. You spent about a month in a coma. You shouldn't strain yourself. A compression fracture of the spine is a serious injury, so you need to save your strength for the future," the trauma surgeon advised. Having heard the last words, which sounded like a sentence, Michael got sad immediately and lost heart. The man knew that all that was awaiting him in the near future was a wheelchair and a life within four walls under the supervision of his mother. However, to Michael's great surprise, Daisy came into the room a couple of hours later. The woman's eyes were swollen from crying. She looked at the man with longing and hope. "What are you doing here? Go away. Do you hear me? I don't want to see you," Michael exclaimed, surprised at his own harshness. Daisy covered her eyes with her hands in response and quickly left the room, unable to stop crying. The nurse that got to witness this encounter shook her head with disapproval and said, "You shouldn't have done that. She's been coming to visit you every day for a month now. They say that she even filed for divorce because of this. Can you imagine? She was only married for 1 week and now she's getting a divorce." This news shocked Michael so much that he started getting hot and cold flashes. How's that possible? What's going on? The man thought, grimacing from the pain in his back. Another month flew by. Michael used this time to master the wheelchair and prepare himself for the new life. To the man's great surprise, Daisy kept coming to the hospital every day to inquire about his health. Of course, deep down, Michael wasn't as angry with her as he was at first. Nevertheless, he continued to be mean to Daisy, using every opportunity to reproach her for her infidelity. However, that didn't prevent the woman from being there for Michael, who constantly needed help because of his disability, even though she had to do it with tears in her eyes. Finally, the long-awaited day arrived. Michael was getting discharged. The trauma surgeon approached Michael, who was sitting in the wheelchair, and said, "Don't despair, young man. There's still hope for you. I heard that they perform spinal surgeries at one of the hospitals in New York. Sure, it's not cheap, but still, you shouldn't lose hope." "Thank you, sir. I am very grateful to you for all your help," Michael answered in a trembling voice. Despite the fact that the man was welcomed home as a hero, he was still in a bad mood. Michael didn't want to be a burden to his mother, who'd have to take care of him until the end of her days. But the most surprising thing for the man was that Daisy didn't leave him even after he was discharged from the hospital and continued to help in every possible way. "What do you want from me? Why are you following me?" Michael exclaimed when the woman came to visit him yet again. Having a hard time holding back her tears, Daisy looked at her ex-fiance and then said, "I love you, Michael. I only married Clive for his money. The truth is that my father's business was failing and he needed urgent help. So he forced me to marry rich in order to use the money of his future son-in-law to improve his financial situation." Only then did Michael understand Daisy's motives. Her father simply left her no choice. On the one hand, Michael couldn't understand how someone could treat their own daughter this way. But on the other hand, he knew that the world could often be cruel to those who least deserved it. Having forgiven Daisy, the man tried to start a new life, which now involved a wheelchair. Of course, the man could no longer get a job where physical work was required. Having faced his new reality, Michael realized that it was time to master the computer, as getting a job in IT seemed to be the best course of action for him. In the meantime, Daisy was by his side every step of the way, helping him and cheering him on. She became his guardian angel. The woman helped Michael master the computer and find his niche in freelancing and remote work. Little by little, the disabled man found his calling in the world of computer animation and graphics. To Michael's immense surprise, his services turned out to be in great demand. In a relatively short period of time, Michael had reached such heights that he could only dream of before. Since the man's income increased several times, he now could afford the surgery he'd been dreaming of all this time. This time around, Daisy accompanied Michael to the hospital. Once again, it was Daisy who helped the young man. She found an excellent hospital in New York specializing in injuries of the musculoskeletal system. "Thank you, dear. Please forgive me for my behavior. I was an idiot," Michael said, guiltily lowering his eyes. "It's me who should be thanking you, Michael. Get well soon. I'm sure everything will turn out great," Daisy whispered with tears in her eyes. Looking at the young people talking sweetly, Mrs. Torres once again caught herself thinking that they were a wonderful couple. On the day of the surgery, Daisy went to church and asked the priest to mention Michael's name during the service. Fortunately, thanks to the professionalism of the talented neurosurgeons and the support of Michael's family, the surgery was successful. However, the man still had to go through a long physical therapy course, which was supposed to firmly put him back on his feet. Michael had to endure a lot, but he managed to overcome all the hardships, and eventually, he was able to walk again. The man will never forget the day when he finally managed to take several independent steps for the first time after the accident. That memorable morning, leaning on his cane, the young man went over to Daisy and handed her a padded velvet box with an engagement ring. "Will you marry me, dear?" Michael asked with tears in his eyes. "Of course I will," Daisy whispered softly and gave her now fiancé a gentle kiss. The young couple stood in the middle of the street for a long time, not paying any attention to the people around, and couldn't help smiling at the sight of the man with the cane and the beautiful woman who gave him true love.